Former President Nelson Mandela once said, "If there are dreams about a beautiful South Africa, there are roads that lead to their goal." And our journey this week takes us to one of the most beautiful of them all. Stretching from Port Shepstone in KwaZulu-Natal to East London in the Eastern Cape lies an area known for its cultural heritage and scenic beauty. The Wild Coast is the traditional home of the Amapondo people. It gave birth to many prominent South Africans, including South Africa's first democratically elected president and global icon, Nelson Mandela. About half of the impressive coastline consists of indigenous forests, with many species unique to the area. Combined with the cultural heritage and temperate climate, it should be an ideal tourism drawcard, yet the area remains one of the country's most underdeveloped. The Eastern Cape has one of the highest unemployment rates of all 9 provinces. Education levels rank among the country's lowest. Infrastructure in some areas is almost non-existent. The Eastern Cape also has the 3rd highest rate of motor accidents in the country, and one look at the roads will tell you why. But One Highway hopes to change all of this. The new N2 Wild Coast Highway project will see the upgrading of existing roads and building of 90 kilometers of new road through the Transkei. With an expected cost of between 8 and 10 billion rand, the new road will cut 75 kilometers off the journey between East London and Durban. It will see the construction of 9 new bridges. The 550-kilometre development aims to create jobs, increase tourism, and accelerate investment and development in the area, providing much-needed access to towns along the relatively untouched coastline.
A little later, we'll look at the Wild Coast N2 Highway from a tourism and tourism development perspective. But first, let's revisit the construction of the road and where the process stands. With me in studio is Vusi Mona. He is, of course, the head of communications at SANRAL. Vusi, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us. It's taken us quite some time to get to this point. Are we ready to go? When can we expect this road to be constructed?
Well, I'll be very honest with you. We are still a couple of years away from even doing the first excavation.
Right.
A project of this nature would naturally take long because of the magnitude involved and the number of stakeholders that need to be consulted, the amounts of investment that we need to make. But I'm happy to say that there's about 98% buy-in on the ground for this project, particularly on the Eastern Cape side of it. A lot of the traditional leaders, the communities there can't wait to have this project implemented.
Of course, I'll touch on the perspective of the community in our conversation, but let's start with the deliberations around the actual route. I understand that a lot of deliberation and discussion and thought went into the actual route that the construction will take. What has finally been decided on that front?
Well, the route will move from the Gunubi interchange in East London, move to Umtata, Port Edwards, Port Shepstone. The initial intention was that it will reach Durban, Isipingo. But there are some outstanding matters we have with KwaZulu-Natal. So currently we are reconfiguring the project and will develop only the eastern side, the Eastern Cape side of it. A lot of thought, as you say, has gone into this. We have looked at the economic imperatives, the access and mobility imperatives, the environmental issues that are involved. So yes, there's quite a lot of thinking and debate and deliberations that's gone into this project.
I understand that as SANRAL, you really had to grapple with this conundrum of bringing much needed infrastructure to the fore, whilst also trying to balance this with conserving the natural environment. How have you managed this balancing act so far?
Well, as SANRAL, we do have a mandate to look after the environment. So whatever development we do, we've got to make sure that we don't destroy endangered species. We preserve the eco-tourism aspect of the areas where we're working. But at the same time, you know, people don't eat stones and plants. We do need to develop these areas for economic benefits, to enable people to access social services, health services, educational services. I mean, there are children in these areas who can't access schools because of the rivers that they have to cross and so on. So all of that has to be balanced against our green friends who will say we shouldn't develop because there are certain plants that are going to be endangered. We are going to come up with conservation programs, and we'll establish towns where we will replant whatever we would have uprooted in the process of building this road.
I want to touch on the community perspective, especially around the opportunities around employment creation. Can you give us an indication of the numbers projected, of the number of jobs that will come from the actual construction of the road, and how these also fare with the jobs that will come after the construction is completed, for example, from the maintenance aspects? During construction,
we are projecting that we should be able to create about 7,000 jobs, direct jobs, and about 28,000 indirect jobs. There will be people who will need to service in one way or the other the 7,000 people who will be working, food suppliers, accommodation suppliers, laundry suppliers, and those are the indirect jobs we are looking at, 28,000. 7,000 direct jobs. And post construction during operation, we are estimating that we will need about 900 full-time direct jobs that will be created and about 1,800 indirect jobs. Now, for a province or a region like that, which is economically depressed, this is going to come in as very much needed aid and capital and an income injection into the area.
Let's look at the tourism aspects in particular of this potential benefits that are going to come from construction. What are the tourism growth projections that we might see?
Tourism is actually going to be one of the major spin-offs of this project. We are projecting that there will be an increase of tourists to the tune of about 600,000 as a result of this project. We are estimating that room or units that will be needed around that area are just above 1,000. So there is a potential for hotel development, for B&Bs, for small communities. And, you know, with a project like this, there's possibilities of developing a number of tourism products as well. I mean, there are 2 bridges that we'll be building along that route, which will provide an opportunity for viewing decks, for an example.
I understand that these could possibly be like the 2 biggest bridges in the Southern Hemisphere. Is this correct?
It is correct. We've done the designs and they look very beautiful. I didn't bring the sketches with me, but these would be tourist attractions in themselves, just like the Nelson Mandela Bridge that SANRAL built a few years ago. It is a tourist attraction. These 2 bridges are going to be tourist attractions. There will be viewing decks. There will be economic activities taking place around there. There will be restaurants. There will be suppliers of all sorts of wares and goods.
Exciting times ahead. Of course, we were talking to Vusi Mona. He is representing SANRAL and the head of communications in this particular project.
Construction of the N2 was mooted more than 10 years ago, but stalled in 2004 pending a full environmental impact assessment. South Africa's Minister of Water and Environmental Affairs, Edna Molewa, eventually gave the green light in July 2011, a decision that was bound to attract controversy.
It's a biodiversity hotspot, it's a centre of plant endemism, and it supports a community that have lived there for hundreds of years and have good livelihoods based on working in the community on the lands. And a toll road, a major road project that cuts through that, is not going to benefit either the local community or the biodiversity, because with a national road of that degree, you will be bringing ribbon development and opening up the coast to the kind of development that you get on the south coast of Durban, which will destroy any biodiversity and this magnificent plant community that is found nowhere else in the world.
Part of our concern about a toll road is that it has to have international regulations, that it's got to be 80 meters wide and must allow a speed of 120 kilometers or things like that. And that's not going to benefit the local people. A toll road like that will be a dividing wall to the local communities. It really becomes a wall.
"90 of the planned 550 kilometers will be a greenfields development, but the proposed route has the potential to impact on the globally recognized Pondoland biodiversity hotspot. There were 49 appeals lodged against the decision, 27 of which were on environmental grounds. Other concerns raised ranged from the lack of significant route alternatives to the formulation of appropriate migration measures. Other concerns raised ranged from the lack of significant route alternatives to the formulation of appropriate mitigation measures. But in her response, the Minister stood firm by her department's findings, saying that there are no compelling reasons to disagree with the environmental report. Government claimed all relevant communities in the area were consulted through community meetings. Community leaders agreed that a new road would enhance accessibility within the region as well as create jobs. They argued for adequate fencing along the road and for rehabilitation of the area after construction. Job creation is a primary reason behind the development. A study by SANRAL estimates that the road would create 6,800 direct jobs as well as up to 540,000 more over a 30-year period. In addition, local industry income is expected to increase by more than 171 million rand, and all sectors will benefit, especially tourism.
Now, the environmental impact assessment that SANRAL commissioned in 2008 included a comprehensive specialist study of the potential impact the proposed road would have on tourism. The overarching terms of reference of the study was to assess the impact it would have on the change in tourism demand due to the highway's construction. Martin Jansen van Vuuren of Thornton co-authored the report, and he joins us now in our Cape Town studio to tell us more. Martin, thank you so much for joining us. How is the proposed N2 route likely to impact on tourism numbers overall?
The tourism numbers are likely to increase simply because there's greater access now because of the tourism, the actual road. So it's all about access and how people can easily get to the area. And particularly if we look at how the N2 route is running, the main beneficiary of that increased access would be the Wild Coast area.
There are different aspects to these growth projections, and I'd like to have you walk us through these various elements and give us an analysis of each. Let's start with the impact on overnight tourists. We know that these generally tend to generate far more revenues than day tourists. How does the route seek to impact on the number of overnight tourists in the area?
What we've done during this study is to have a look at how tourism would grow with the road and without the road. So then measuring the impact in terms of how many additional tourists would actually be visiting the area. And in terms of the numbers, we looked at a 10-year period, and over that 10-year period we're looking at over 674,000 additional tourists that's being generated over that forecast period. So those tourists, in terms of when we break it down as to where they will go, the majority of those would be new tourists to the Wild Coast area. We look at where it runs, the southern part of KwaZulu-Natal is already developed, so where the biggest impact would be will be through the Wild Coast area. And it would be overnight tourists because additional access, and that would lead in to new tourism products that's being developed.
Martin, how does the infrastructure development of this nature impact on the number of tourism products that then become available as a result?
I think the one leads to the other is that because of the additional tourists to the area, they're looking for tourism products. And when we say tourism products, we're not just talking about accommodation. What we've got to keep in mind is that for tourists, they're looking for various types of experiences. So accommodation is part of this experience, but there's also the nature experience, the wildlife experience that they're looking for. So we're also talking about tours and the development of tours. So with additional tourists comes a whole range of tourism products, ranging from accommodation right through to the experiences, the attractions, but also looking at even restaurants in terms of new restaurants being developed because there's increased demand for that type of service.
Of course, if we look at this demand and we relate it to what the community wants out of this particular project, there's no denying that for them, the biggest outcome would be employment creation. If we were to look at the projected numbers, how does short-term project-based employment fare with long-term employment opportunities that can come out of this?
Yeah, I think in terms of the tourism industry, it is, when we look at the sustainable tourism, we're looking at long-term employment. There's a difference between the permanent employment and seasonal employment. When we've got a seasonal tourism destination, there might be seasonal variations. So over, for example, a Christmas period where there's high demand, people will be employed on a temporary basis in order to fulfill the additional demand. But we're looking at long-term employment. To give you a simple example, in terms of a guest house, for example, if you take a small guest house, in order to run that, you would need at least 4 to 5 people in order to service anything from the rooms, cleaning the rooms, right through to cooking meals, as well as the management of that establishment. And we look at the number of tourists that we've recommended or projected, that adds up to quite a number of additional employment opportunities. And that will obviously be split between the permanent employees and then more temporary employees during the peak seasons.
Of course, this route has the potential to create integrated interconnectivity between KwaZulu-Natal, the Eastern Cape, and the Western Cape. What benefits can be accrued from the traffic that will be generated by transit tourists traversing across the provinces?
Yeah, absolutely. If we look at the particularly the domestic tourism profile of the Eastern Cape, they get far more tourists from the Western Cape than they do from KwaZulu-Natal. And I think a big reason for that is the actual access, that the access is quite easier from the Western Cape into the Eastern Cape than it is from KwaZulu-Natal into the Eastern Cape. And with the new route, that access would improve from the northern parts. When we look at just people transiting, there's definitely some benefits in terms of, particularly when we look at the economic spin-off in terms of simple things like stopping for fuel, stopping for a meal. So even on a small scale, relatively to the people that stay overnight, there's still benefits that can be obtained through the increased access and people transit in transit through the area.
Quickly, Martin, of course you've had to balance the conservation issues of the natural heritage with the environmental impact that comes from increased volumes driven by tourism. Any mitigating strategies that you've already begun to think about and that will be put in place?
One of the big concerns obviously is the environmental impact of additional tourists through that area. The area is very pristine and it's well known in terms of its key attraction is actually being remote. But I think in terms of the routing of the N2, it would not become that it becomes a high volume tourism area. I still believe that there will be increasing number of tourists to the area, increased number of tourism products that's being developed, but I do not believe that it will suddenly turn into a mass tourism destination. That is the one part. I think secondly also it's about enforcing the environmental rules in terms of when people visit a particular nature reserve, etc. It's about enforcement of the rules that is currently existing to protect the natural environment. And also, when you promote a destination as an environmentally sensitive destination, and for people to come and see, particularly in terms of the new movement in terms of green and sustainable development, I think that could actually be a benefit where the local tourism industry is encouraged in order to preserve the natural environment and to develop it in a sustainable way, and that can actually become a main key draw card in